when a retired K-9 named Shadow refused to leave the crumbling halls of an abandoned school. No one understood why, but what began as a strange behavioral quirk soon unraveled a deeply buried truth, one that had been hidden for years beneath layers of silence, concrete, and fear. Officer Clara Wu thought she was just investigating a local break-in. What she discovered was a hidden detention wing, long erased from official maps, where missing girls had been secretly held and forgotten. It took a determined dog, a young boy's innocence, and a handler who chose to trust instinct over protocol to expose one of the most disturbing cover-ups in the city's history. Through 8 gripping chapters, this story follows the bond between a broken K-9 and the people who believed in him, and how a single bark became the voice for those who had none. Welcome to Heroic Animals, where every bark, every paw print, and every silent act of courage becomes a story worth remembering. This is the place where forgotten strays become heroes, where retired K-9s return to protect those who cannot speak, where loyalty is measured not in years, but in moments that change lives forever. Because animals don't just feel, they understand. They hear what we miss. They sense what we ignore. And sometimes, they're the only ones brave enough to act. Today's story begins in silence. An old school, long abandoned, a boy, lost in the noise of the city, and a dog, once discarded, who refused to walk away. What Shadow uncovered beneath that crumbling concrete was more than evidence. It was truth. It was justice. It was a voice for those who had none. So lean in, let your heart slow down, and follow us into the shadows. Because what this dog found will stay with you long after the video ends. This is Heroic Animals, and this is Shadow's story. It started with a bark. Not the loud, aggressive kind, but a low, pointed one, repeated, intentional, focused. K-9 Unit Shadow had been retired for 6 months. Once part of the Urban Search and Rescue Division, he was now living quietly with his handler, Officer Clara Wu, in a sleepy part of Bridgeport. Clara had taken to bringing him on evening walks to help ease the transition. Shadow still needed structure, purpose, and somewhere deep down, she wasn't ready to let go either. That evening, as they passed the abandoned Lincoln Middle School, Shadow stopped. He didn't sniff. He didn't circle. He just stared at the old rusted gate, his ears pinned forward, his body low. Then he barked. Clara frowned. It's just a building, buddy. But Shadow didn't move. He barked again, short, direct, then turned his gaze to Clara, eyes alert, like he was trying to say something. She tugged his leash gently. Come on, it's been empty for years. Still, Shadow wouldn't budge. He pulled, and that's when Clara noticed something. The gate wasn't locked anymore. Clara Wu returned to the school the next morning. She told herself it was just to satisfy curiosity. A formality. The school had been shut down for over a decade after an arson incident gutted the West Wing. No one had gone near it in years. But as she approached, Shadow's posture shifted again, tail stiff, head low, ears scanning, exactly the same tension as last night. Except this time, the gate was open. She paused, hand resting on her sidearm. That wasn't open yesterday. Shadow led the way without hesitation. The school grounds were overgrown. Cracked asphalt, vines climbing rusted lockers thrown out into the yard. Birds chirped in the distance. But there was a stillness to the air that felt wrong. Not the quiet of abandonment. The quiet of a place waiting. Shadow pulled her toward the side of the building. Toward an old service entrance. Door sealed with police tape that had long since faded. And that's when she saw it. Scratches. Fresh. Long. Sharp scratches across the lower part of the metal door. Deep enough to mark rusted steel. Too deep for animals. Shadow sniffed once, then pressed his body against the door. Nose up, tail rigid, he let out a low, vibrating whine. Clara felt her chest tighten. There were only 2 reasons a dog like Shadow made that sound. Fear, or grief. She took a step back, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Dispatch. This is Wu. I need a unit sent to 213 Faraday Street. Lincoln Middle School. Possible forced entry. I'm going in. The door creaked open into darkness. Her flashlight cut through the dust. Peeling paint. Hallway lockers dented like something had rammed them. Graffiti dated back years, mostly bored teenagers. But then they reached the bottom of the staircase. And Shadow stopped cold. He growled again, this time low. Deliberate. He moved toward one of the classroom doors, room 11C, and stood rigid, staring at it like it could move. Clara tried the knob. Locked. She knelt beside it, shining her flashlight across the edge. There, barely visible, was something etched into the wood. Not graffiti. Letters. Shaky. Childlike. "Help me. I'm still here." Her stomach dropped. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, too long. But just enough. Clara had already called it in as a possible child endangerment case. It could have been a prank. But something told her this was no game. As the other officers swept the building, Clara turned her attention back to 11C. With a pry bar, she forced the lock. The door swung open into a room filled with dust-covered desks, a collapsed ceiling tile, and something else. A mattress, stained, a pile of old snack wrappers, a child's shoe, and a plastic lunchbox with the name, Kaylee, scratched into the side. Shadow moved toward it slowly. He sniffed once, then sat beside it, as if he'd found what he was looking for. But the room was empty. No one was there, only the memory of someone who had been. In the quiet that followed, Clara radioed back to base. Her voice didn't shake, but something in her chest did. "Dispatch. We've got signs of recent habitation. Possibly a minor. Room 11C. Send CSU. And," she paused, "bring someone who can read trauma." Because what she saw in Shadow's eyes wasn't just instinct. It was recognition. He'd smelled that before. And whatever had happened in that room wasn't over. The crime scene unit arrived an hour later. They treated the classroom like any cold case. Photos, bagged evidence, fingerprint dusting. But what unsettled Clara most wasn't the state of the room. It was how familiar Shadow acted. He kept circling the space near the far wall, where a crooked radiator hung from rusted bolts. He sniffed at the floor. Then the cracked tiles. Then something behind the old chalkboard. Clara followed his nose and froze. Beneath a flaking layer of green paint, barely visible, was a second message. "I want out," etched with something sharp. Maybe a key, maybe a nail. She ran her fingers along the letters and noticed the tremble in her hand. This wasn't a squat, she muttered. It was a prison. One of the techs called over. "Detective Wu, you'll want to see this." In the back corner of the room, behind a false panel under the teacher's desk, they had found a hidden crawl space. Shadow crawled inside without hesitation. There was a narrow tunnel, about the width of a vent, and something caught in the webbing inside, a bracelet. Pink, plastic, tiny. "Belongs to a child," Clara said softly, but the metal tag on the inside made her breath hitch. Kaylee M. Allergy, penicillin. So the name wasn't just a guess on the lunchbox. It was real. Back at the precinct, Clara laid out what they had so far. An abandoned school with recent signs of child habitation. A hidden crawl space. A mattress. A bracelet. And a dog that couldn't let it go. She started digging. Kaylee M. Bridgeport. 8 to 10 years old. She cross-checked missing persons reports from the last 3 years. Nothing. Then she widened the radius. Nothing again. It wasn't until she searched Kaylee plus penicillin allergy that something popped up. A case from 6 years ago. Not from Bridgeport. From a city 3 counties over. Kaylee Morgan, age 5, vanished on her way home from kindergarten. Backpack found near a service road. Presumed abducted. Case went cold in 2019. Clara stared at the file for a long time. The timeline fit. The name fit. The bracelet allergy. Everything. But there was one problem. If this was the same girl, why was no one looking anymore? Shadow pawed at the screen beside her desk. Nose pressed to the photo of Kaylee. His gaze locked on it. And he whimpered. Not from pain. From recognition. "Did you know her?" Clara whispered. "Did you smell this before?" Shadow turned in a tight circle and barked once. And in that instant, Clara remembered. 2 years ago, Shadow was deployed for a school lockdown drill in the same region. She'd almost forgotten about it. She remembered the call-out, but not the detail. She pulled up the K-9 deployment logs. There it was. March 2022 Narcotics and Missing Person Search, Secondary School District No. 45. Outcome. Inconclusive. Shadow had shown non-specific interest near an old janitorial closet and refused to leave the hallway. But no evidence had been found. No follow-up was done. Because no one listened. Because a dog barking at a hallway wasn't enough. Clara stood slowly and looked down at him. You tried to say something back then, didn't you? Shadow just stared. And Clara understood something chilling. Kaylee may not have been just hidden. She might have been moved. Again. And again. But if Shadow could smell her now, then maybe she wasn't gone. Maybe she was still out there. And whoever took her had used the school before. Maybe was using others. This wasn't over. This was the start. Clara Wu drove back to Lincoln Middle School just before sunset. She'd gone over the case file for Kaylee Morgan 3 times. The timeline, the bracelet, the way Shadow reacted. And one thing kept gnawing at her. Why this school? It was too far from where Kaylee had disappeared. Too abandoned to attract squatters. Too sealed off for someone to live inside casually. Unless someone knew it well. Unless someone had keys. She parked around the back this time, where old faculty parking used to be. Her flashlight swept across the chain-link fence. Shadow stayed close, his posture tense. As she approached the west wing, the one marked, unsafe, he stopped. Refused to go further. What's wrong, buddy? Shadow sniffed the air, lowered his head, and let out a slow, deliberate growl. Clara turned her light toward the wall beside them. The windows were blacked out, boarded from the inside, and in the center of one panel, just visible under the grime, fresh fingerprints. Clara found a side door. Officially, this wing had been closed due to fire damage years ago. But the lock on this door? New. No city-issued padlock, no chains, just a clean, stainless steel deadbolt that looked like it came from a modern supply store. Someone's been using this. She tried her universal bypass key. And after some work, it clicked. The air inside hit her like a wall. Stale, metallic, not mold, not smoke, something synthetic. She stepped inside. Shadow followed, paws barely making a sound on the dusty tile. The hall was lined with broken lockers, collapsed ceiling panels, and something stranger. On the left side, every door had been stripped of its room number. On the right, they were intact. 6A, 6B, 6C. Clara opened one, and what she found made her stop breathing. It wasn't a classroom anymore. The floor had been swept. The windows painted black. A single bed frame sat in the corner. A metal cot, thin mattress, no blankets. But on the wall, dozens of stickers, rainbows, butterflies, stars. And above the cot, crooked but centered, was a taped drawing, crayon, a child's hand, 3 stick figures, a tall man, a girl with pigtails, and a dog. Clara turned slowly. Shadow had backed into the doorway. His ears down, tail rigid. He stared at the drawing and let out a sound she hadn't heard from him in years. A low moan. Morning. He knew. This was hers. This was Kaylee's room. She backed out and checked the other doors. 6B. Another makeshift sleeping space. Smaller. No drawings. 6C. The same. And this time, the walls had restraints drilled into them. Old leather straps, screwed to the drywall. God. Shadow pushed ahead and sniffed the straps. Then growled, turning toward a corner where an air vent was bolted low to the floor. He barked once. Clara crouched and shined her flashlight through it. The shaft went deeper, into the foundation. Not standard HVAC. This had been modified. Someone built this system deliberately. She stood, voice trembling. This wasn't just a hideout. This was a holding center. She exited the wing fast. Called it in as a level 2 discovery. Evidence of long-term unlawful confinement. A new task force would be needed. Forensics, excavation, infrared scans of the subfloor. But none of that would happen tonight. What mattered now was what came next. Back at her car, she pulled up the oldest renovation permit for Lincoln Middle. Cross-referenced contractors, suppliers, and that's when she saw it. Renovation managed by Meridian Youth Restoration Services. Private, contracted. She searched the name and felt her stomach turn. Meridian had handled renovation and youth repurposing centers in 4 other counties. Each of those centers had been shut down, quietly, each time for irregularities. And each of them was located near a missing child case. Clara looked down at Shadow, whose eyes were locked on the building. You knew something was wrong here, she whispered, but it's bigger than one school. Shadow didn't move, because now, he wasn't just tracking a girl. He was tracking a pattern. The following morning, Clara Wu walked into the precinct with a coffee in one hand and the floor plans of Lincoln Middle under her arm. She hadn't slept much. Neither had Shadow. He sat by her desk, watching every movement in the squad room like his instincts were working overtime. Like he knew someone out there was watching back. Clara laid out the blueprints on the evidence table and called over her lieutenant. "There's a wing that was never on the official drawings," she said, "converted into makeshift rooms. I found restraints, modified ventilation." Shadow tracked it down. "I think Kaylee Morgan was held there." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a 6-year-old cold case. And now it's warm again," she replied. Later that day, Clara drove to a different precinct across the county line. The original Kaylee Morgan case had been handled there. She requested the archived box, dusty, water-damaged, barely touched in years. Inside were the usual contents: missing child flyers, statements from teachers and parents, grainy footage from nearby traffic cameras. She was about to close it when a flash drive slipped from beneath the folder. No label, just metal and plastic. Clara plugged it into her laptop. It was full of photos. Hundreds. Most seemed irrelevant: construction records, building permits, sign-in logs. But one image made her pause. It was from a city council brochure about school renovations, dated a year before Kaylee disappeared. In the background stood a man in a beige polo shirt. And next to him, a little girl with pigtails, standing stiffly, clutching a lunchbox. Zooming in confirmed it. Kaylee. The timestamp was 6 months after she was declared missing. She'd been seen, publicly photographed, after her disappearance. And no one noticed. Clara ran the man's face through facial recognition. It took less than 10 minutes to find him. Roger Clay, age 51, former school district consultant, now on the board of a nonprofit called Meridian Youth Restoration Services. She blinked. The same group that renovated the hidden wing at Lincoln Middle. She kept digging. Meridian wasn't just shady, it was protected. High-level donors, quiet settlements, whispers of alternative discipline models for at-risk children. Clara's chest tightened. They hadn't just taken Kaylee. They'd taken others. That evening, she met with Detective Paul Colter, an old friend and a forensic data analyst, at a diner just outside Bridgeport. She slid the photo across the table. "That's Kaylee Morgan, and that's Roger Clay." Picture was taken after her disappearance. Colter whistled low. "You're telling me this guy was near a missing girl after she vanished and no one questioned it?" Clara nodded grimly. "I think they scrubbed it. Quietly. And she wasn't the only one." Colter leaned in. "What's your plan?" "I need every property Meridian has ever touched. Every restoration site. Every subcontractor. I want to cross-reference them against every child reported missing within a 100-mile radius in the last 10 years. Colter blinked. "That's hundreds of kids. Then we better start now." Back in her apartment that night, Clara sat on the floor beside Shadow. She held up the photo again, the girl in the background. Barely visible, eyes dull. 6 years, she whispered. "You've been trying to tell us for 6 years." Shadow leaned into her side, silent as ever. But she knew. He remembered. And now, they would, too. Because this time, the bark wouldn't be ignored. This time, the story wouldn't stay buried. It was almost midnight when Clara Wu got the call. Blocked number. Male voice. Hoarse. Nervous. "You're the one looking into Lincoln Middle?" Clara's back straightened. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter. I worked for them. Meridian. Maintenance. Night shift. I saw things." "You're not wrong." She went cold. "You saw the girl?" "More than one. They brought them in late. Always through the side door. No paperwork. Just said they were placements." "Where are they now?" Silence. "Gone. Before the place was shut. Packed up one night. No warning." Clara's voice dropped. "Did you ever tell anyone?" "Tried. Sent a letter. Photos. Even called a hotline once. No one followed up." "Do you still have the photos?" A longer pause. "I kept a copy. Just in case. They weren't all children. Some were teens. One had a cast on her leg. The man in charge, he didn't care. They weren't students. Not officially. They were ghosts. I need to meet. Not safe. Not yet. But I'll leave the drive. Tomorrow." Behind the newspaper stand outside 4th and Main. Taped under the back bench. "Noon. Don't be followed." Click. Clara didn't sleep. She reviewed everything again. Shadow paced the living room. At sunrise, she dressed in civilian clothes. Took a plane car. Left her badge at home. Just her. a sat phone, and Shadow, always at her side. They arrived at 4th and Main at 11:57. She walked casually past the newspaper stand. It was old, unused, rusting. Then she sat on the bench, tying her shoe as she reached beneath it. Felt tape. A plastic USB. Exactly where the voice said it would be. She didn't look back, didn't run, just walked back to the car with Shadow trotting beside her. Back at her apartment, she plugged in the drive. No password, just a folder titled, "They Never Wanted This Found." Inside, photos. Over 24 images, time-stamped over a 2-year span. All inside Lincoln Middle's West Wing. All of children, sleeping, sitting, eating alone, no adults in the frames. But each one showed the same cold, sparse room, the same blacked-out windows, the same beds, and in one photo, clear, undeniable, Kaylee Morgan, older than when she disappeared, looking directly at the camera, eyes hollow. Behind her was a chalkboard, and scrawled across it, "I want my mom." There were also documents, scan of a ledger, payment records, each line item listed initials, dates, length of stay, and next to it, repatriated, or transferred. But some had only 2 letters, X, and then a date. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. These weren't treatments, these were disposals. It was a ledger of kids processed through a system that didn't exist on paper. She hit print, every single file, then grabbed her jacket and went straight to her old friend, Detective Paul Colter. Colter read through the pages slowly. His face grew darker with each line. "This is federal, Clara. I know. They'll try to bury it. I know. You realize this could break everything?" Clara looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not backing off. And Shadow isn't either." Colter sighed, then leaned back. "Okay, let's play this smart. I'll push it through a friend at the state AG's office. Quiet, off record." Then he added, "But you need to watch your back. Because now, you're not just uncovering a cold case. You're blowing up a pipeline." Back at home, Clara stared out the window as dusk fell. Shadow lay by the door, his eyes fixed on the hallway beyond. Waiting, listening. She placed her hand on his head. They won't stop us this time. Because what started with a growl in an empty school was now becoming something far bigger. Something they couldn't silence. Not anymore. The call came at 2:41 a.m. Clara bolted upright in bed. Shadow was already at the door. Ears up, tail stiff. It was Colter. "Wake up. Someone broke into the precinct. Not a full breach, just one room. Yours." Clara was out the door in 10 minutes. By the time she arrived, the evidence room was already cordoned off. The files she'd printed were gone. Every copy she left behind, missing. But one thing hadn't been touched. Shadow's collar camera. She had installed it as a backup the day after they found the chalk writing in the school. She hadn't planned on using it. Now it might be the only thing they had left. Clara plugged the collar cam into her laptop in the car. Shadow sat beside her, alert, sensing something off. The video began, static. Then footage of the school basement from 2 nights ago. She watched again, slowly, then froze. In the far corner of the frame, almost missed, was a trapdoor. Low, blended with the grime-covered tiles. It hadn't been on any map. It hadn't even smelled different. But Shadow had stared at that spot for 3 full seconds. Clara whispered, "You knew." By 8 a.m., she and Colter were back at Lincoln Middle with a small forensics team and a fresh warrant. They entered through the maintenance wing, Shadow leading. And there, under a peeling floorboard near the boiler room, they found it. A sealed panel of concrete, hastily patched over with a different kind of grout. Too recent. A tech team brought out drills and sonar scanners. Underneath, a hollow cavity. It took hours to break through. What they uncovered wasn't just disturbing. It was devastating. The space was about the size of a cargo container. Walls covered in insulation foam. Inside were 6 identical beds. Bolted down. 6 sets of restraints. 3 small lockers. And worst of all, a wall of children's drawings. Faint, almost wiped clean. Figures of girls with red hair. A sun, a door, a dog, and in blocky crayon letters. Shadow came back. Clara blinked, overcome. Shadow padded forward slowly, then stopped, placing one paw on the floor. He looked up at Clara. She knelt beside him, voice barely a whisper. "You remembered them." Among the debris was an old-school ID card. Worn, bent. It belonged to a girl named Elena G., age 13. Reported missing in 2019. Another name never mentioned in the Meridian files. But she had been here. And someone had hidden it all, under their feet. A silence fell across the room. One of the forensic officers muttered, "This isn't just neglect. This is industrialized." Clara stood. "This is intentional disappearance." Colter nodded grimly. "And we've just blown the lid off it." That night, the media caught wind. A leak. An anonymous email with one word. Proof. Local news stations ran footage of officers loading evidence bags from the school. But Clara knew what was coming next. Meridian wouldn't just hide. They'd retaliate. So she called her captain. Told him everything. And finally, handed over the caller footage. It was the only untouched chain of custody they had. The last digital key to a cover-up years in the making. As the sun rose, Clara sat on her apartment steps with Shadow. She watched the city wake up. Watched parents walk kids to school. The clatter of shoes on sidewalks. She whispered to the dog beside her, "We're not done yet." Because somewhere out there, the last missing name on the ledger was still unaccounted for. And Shadow, he wasn't done barking. Not until every voice was heard. The school was sealed by dawn. Police tape, news vans, state investigators. But the real story wasn't the scene, it was what came after. Because the USB copy Clara had stashed at home. The one she never mentioned to anyone but Shadow. It held more than just documents. It held a final audio file. Labeled, "For the one WHO listens." Clara played it. A girl's voice, no older than 11. Trembling, whispering, "If anyone ever hears this. My name is Elena. We were taken here. We sleep in the dark. They tell us no one is looking for us, but I know someone is. I heard the dog barking once. He came back. He'll find us." Silence. Then just 4 words. "Please, tell my mom." Clara pressed pause, hand trembling. Shadow leaned against her leg. Quiet. He had found the room. He had heard what no one else would. 3 days later, national headlines exploded. Secret detention wing found in abandoned school. Police dog exposes child trafficking cover-up. Where is Meridian now? The governor called for an emergency investigation. A whistleblower from inside Meridian's legal team came forward. She confirmed what Clara already suspected. The CARE program was a front. The children were undocumented, systemically erased from foster registries, passed between facilities under vague reformation codes. They weren't just lost, they were made invisible. Elena's mother, Maria G., had never stopped searching. She'd been dismissed, labeled unstable, accused of abandoning her daughter. When Clara knocked on her apartment door, Maria collapsed to her knees before she could say a word. Clara just knelt with her. No cameras, no press, just 2 people and a dog, on a concrete floor. Maria whispered, "She knew you'd come. She used to draw him. The dog said he was real. I thought it was just a dream." Clara opened her satchel and pulled out a crayon drawing they found beneath the trapdoor. It showed a German shepherd beside a little girl in a blue hoodie. They were both smiling. The state filed charges. 10 arrests. 2 federal indictments. But the trial would take months. Maybe years. Clara didn't care. She only cared about the kids. Because 5 girls were still missing from the ledger. And if Shadow had proven anything, it was that some footprints don't fade with time. They just wait to be followed. 3 weeks later, the city held a ceremony. Not for Clara, not even for the case, but for the children, and one dog. In front of the newly reopened Lincoln Community Garden, right where the school once stood a small bronze statue. It depicted a child kneeling beside a German shepherd. On the base, it read, "To the voices that were almost silenced. To the dog who heard them." Shadow sat beside the statue. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared forward, like he always did when he knew. That night, Clara returned home and opened the final envelope sent anonymously. Inside was a single piece of lined paper. A drawing, 6 girls, 1 dog, and a window open to the sun. They were free. And in the corner, written in blocky letters, "Thank you for not forgetting us." She pinned it to her wall. Then knelt beside Shadow. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought them home." And for the first time in weeks, Shadow closed his eyes. and slept like he had nothing left to prove. Because this time, the children were heard, and the dog never stopped listening. The city never noticed the old school being torn down. Just another demolition order. Another forgotten building erased from the skyline. But for Eli, and those who knew the truth, it wasn't just bricks and concrete, it was the grave of something darker, and now, finally, the resting place of someone who refused to stay forgotten. Shadow. The name had spread, first as a whisper, then as a ripple. A dog with haunted eyes and a growl that cut through silence. A boy who followed where adults feared. And a secret buried not just in the walls, but in the systems meant to protect children. The investigation that followed cracked wide open. Officials combed through decades of misfiled reports, broken chains of custody, and transfer papers that led nowhere. What they found wasn't just one crime. It was a pattern, a long trail of kids, moved, lost, transferred. On paper, they became numbers. In truth, they became ghosts. But the ghosts had voices. In chalk drawings on basement walls. In USB drives hidden under rusted stairs. In a retired dog's refusal to look away. And that was enough. Eli was placed with a family that didn't care where he came from, but who he could become. A couple who didn't flinch when he woke from nightmares. Who didn't ask him to forget Shadow, but helped him remember him with pride. They framed the drawing, the one Shadow pulled from the walls, the one signed, M. They hung it in Eli's new room, right beside a plaque the city sent. In honor of Shadow, K9 hero. Guardian of the forgotten. But the real memorial was built months later. It stood quietly beside the new community center, where the school used to be. A bronze statue, life-size, Shadow, in mid-stance. Ears perked, eyes forward. At his feet, a small inscription. He didn't bark for attention. He barked for those who couldn't. At the unveiling, the mayor gave a speech. Local news showed up. People clapped politely. But for Eli, it was quieter than that. More personal. He walked up to the statue alone after the crowd left. Placed one hand gently on the cold bronze fur. Then sat beside it. For a long time. He didn't cry. He whispered, "I remember. I always will." He wasn't alone for long. Other children, older now, came too. One left a red marble. Another, a folded paper plane. And each time Eli came back, there was something new at Shadow's paws. Tiny tributes, small truths. Because Shadow hadn't just uncovered a crime. He'd awakened a memory in people who'd spent years trying to forget. And slowly, they began to remember. Teachers came forward. A retired janitor. A former counselor. They told stories they had kept buried. And some of those stories filled in the gaps. About a girl named Maya who always drew wolves. About a boy named Jordan who never got to 6th grade. About a stray dog who used to sneak through the fence, again and again, and sleep by the back door of the old gymnasium. The same dog that one night stood between a man and a child, and wouldn't let him pass. They hadn't known his name then. They called him, the Ghost Shepherd. But now they did. Shadow. And the stories kept coming. By the time the 1-year anniversary arrived, Eli had grown taller, his voice deeper, but his eyes? Still bright, still searching. He'd started volunteering at a rescue shelter. He told the other kids stories about loyalty, about listening, about how some heroes don't wear badges or capes. They wear fur, and scars, and silence. At the final community vigil, a crowd gathered under soft light. Families, survivors, reporters. A few officers stood quietly near the back. One of them had once dismissed a dog for being just a stray. Now he stood with his cap off. Eli was asked to speak. He didn't read a speech. He just stepped up, cleared his throat, and looked at the crowd. Then, with a voice calm and steady, he said, "When Shadow found me, I didn't believe in heroes. I thought they were stories for other people. But he didn't care about stories. He cared about truth. He didn't look away. And because of him, none of you can anymore." The silence afterward was heavy and full. And then someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the courtyard rang with something that sounded like closure. Like gratitude. Like truth being heard at last. Headphones, so if you're hearing this now, wherever you are, maybe on a long drive, or curled up in bed, just remember, sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one who never speaks. Sometimes justice begins with a growl. And sometimes, All it takes is one dog who refuses to walk away. This was Shadow's story. Thank you for listening. This is Heroic Animals, where courage has 4 legs and never forgets. Glowing Star, welcome to Heroic Animals, where every bark, every paw print, and every silent act of courage becomes a story worth remembering. This is the place where forgotten strays become heroes, where retired canines return to protect those who cannot speak, where loyalty is measured not in years, but in moments that change lives forever. Because animals don't just feel, they understand. They hear what we miss. They sense what we ignore. And sometimes, they're the only ones brave enough to act. Candle. Today's story begins in silence. An old school, long abandoned, a boy, lost in the noise of the city, and a dog, once discarded, who refused to walk away. What Shadow uncovered beneath that crumbling concrete was more than evidence. It was truth. It was justice. It was a voice for those who had none. So lean in, let your heart slow down, and follow us into the shadows. Because what this dog found will stay with you long after the video ends. Headphone. This is Heroic Animals. And this is Shadow's story.